I was halfway through my third coffee of the morning, staring at the steam curling from the mug, when I noticed her for the first time. Not really for the first time, she had been living next door for months. But that day, something made her presence feel different. She stood by the counter, waiting for her cappuccino, her fingers brushing against the rim of her tote bag, a faint crease between her eyebrows that made her look both annoyed and vulnerable. I looked down at my cup, pretending to check my phone, though I hadn't touched it in 5 minutes. My thumb hovered over a draft message I'd never sent, the one I kept thinking I'd type and then delete. Life had been the same for months: work, gym, reheated dinners at my desk. Quiet, neat, predictable. And lonely, but in the way that doesn't really hurt. You just notice it when someone else moves through the space you occupy. She turned, glanced in my direction, and for a moment our eyes met. Not long enough to be a stare, just long enough for me to catch a hint of a smile tugging at her lips, almost invisible. I looked away too quickly, pretending to sip my coffee, and my throat tightened for no reason I could name. "Hey," she said, voice soft but not uncertain, the kind that sounded like she didn't have to apologize for being anywhere. "You're here early." I laughed, a little short. "Yeah. Trying to make the most of the morning." Words came out awkwardly, but I didn't care. Something about the way she tilted her head at me made my chest tighten in a way I didn't recognize. She repeated my order back to me without looking at the menu, like she remembered it from some previous encounter, small, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my stomach flutter. "Medium latte. With 2 pumps of hazelnut?" "Yeah," I said, and then paused, my hand brushing the napkin under my cup. I didn't usually notice that kind of attention. Most people didn't remember. We fell into an easy silence after that. Not the loud, awkward kind, but the one that hangs like a fog between words, where you feel the other person's presence more than you hear it. She stirred her drink, a slow, deliberate motion, and I found myself noticing everything: the faint scent of lavender in her hair, the way her ring caught the light, the way she laughed quietly at nothing at all. "I haven't seen you around much," I said finally, words out before I could second-guess them. She shrugged, sipping her latte, eyes flicking toward the window. "I keep to myself. But I like this place. Feels like a pause from everything else." I nodded, and my chest tightened again. I wanted to say something that mattered, but instead I just folded the napkin under my mug, letting my fingers linger over the crease. She glanced at me then, and for a second, I thought she was going to say something, but she didn't. She gathered her bag and started toward the door. "See you around," she said, voice light, but when she looked at me, it lingered in a way that made me question my own heartbeat. I watched her leave, waited until the door swung shut, and felt a sudden, odd emptiness. Then my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I opened it, eyebrows furrowing. "Coffee tomorrow? 10 a.m.? I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over reply. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't immediately think about work. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe a few minutes early, half expecting her not to show. She did, already seated at a corner table, the sunlight catching the faint streaks of gray in her hair. She waved when she saw me, and I felt a twinge in my chest I didn't want to name. We ordered tea this time, something warmer, less bitter than my usual coffee. She picked chamomile, and I followed her lead without thinking. The table was small, our knees nearly touching, though we didn't notice at first. Silence settled between us, comfortable at first, but charged in a way that made me constantly aware of the space my hands took, the way my foot brushed hers under the table. "You know," she said finally, stirring her tea slowly, "I used to come here when my daughter was little. We'd sit by the window and watch the leaves fall. She'd always spill her juice or drop a crayon on the floor, and I'd just let it happen." I nodded, letting the words sink in. There was a softness in her tone, not nostalgia exactly, more like a gentle ache. "Sounds peaceful," I said. "It was," she admitted. "Even when it was messy." Her gaze drifted to mine, and I caught the subtle hesitation there, as if she'd almost said something she wasn't supposed to. Something forbidden, maybe? I looked down at my hands, imagining the warmth of hers over mine, and quickly shook it off. She was 45. Divorced, probably. A life already lived in ways I couldn't fully step into. And yet, sitting across from her, I felt lighter, like she just handed me a piece of air I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath for. We talked about small things, books, the city's slow changes, but under every sentence, I could feel an undercurrent I didn't know how to name. I imagined her laughter in my apartment, imagined touching her hand by accident, imagined mornings that weren't solitary anymore. My stomach twisted with the impossibility of it, and I laughed quietly at nothing, hoping she wouldn't notice the way my thoughts wandered. "Thanks for coming," she said, breaking a silence that had grown too thick. Her eyes lingered on mine, a soft weight that pressed lightly against the careful walls I'd built around myself. I nodded, unsure if I should say anything that mattered. Instead, I brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a motion so small, so hesitant, that it felt like a confession in itself. She didn't flinch. Instead, she looked at me with that quiet, half-smile that made my chest ache. As I left, walking home in the slow drizzle of rain, I replayed the moment over and over. Her eyes, the tilt of her head, the delicate pause before she spoke. It wasn't about romance yet. Not really. It was about being seen. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. A week later, I found her on the small terrace outside the building, watering the potted plants she'd arranged along the railing. The scent of wet earth mixed with the faint perfume she always wore, something subtle, like chamomile and cedar. I hesitated, hands in my pockets, trying to figure out if I should just turn around and leave, like nothing had changed. "Hey," I said finally, voice quieter than I intended. She glanced up, and for a moment, her expression flickered, surprise, amusement, something unreadable. Then she smiled, small, deliberate. "You're persistent," she said. I shrugged, unable to stop the corner of my mouth from lifting. "I guess." My eyes traced the curve of her hand as it rested on the watering can. The gesture was so ordinary, and yet impossible to look away from. We lingered in silence, neither moving toward nor away from each other. I wanted to ask if she'd be free later, wanted to suggest something ridiculous, like a walk around the block, but the words caught in my throat. She set the watering can down and wiped her hands on a towel. "I didn't expect to see you today," she said. Something in her tone made me pause. Not cold exactly, but cautious. Guarded. I nodded, searching for the right words, and found none. My hand twitched against my leg, fingers brushing the fabric of my jeans. A leaf fell between us, landing on the railing. She picked it up, held it for a moment, then let it drop. We talked about minor things, the weather, the neighbor's cat, but each sentence carried undercurrents we didn't acknowledge. I noticed how she avoided my eyes when I smiled too long. How her laugh faltered mid-note when I touched her hand accidentally while handing her the watering can. A shadow moved across the terrace. Her friend, I realized too late, stepping outside with a basket of laundry. She straightened instantly, the spell of quiet intimacy breaking like glass. "Ah. Just hanging out," she said, voice clipped, and I felt the pull of something unspoken, something we were both suddenly aware of. The friend lingered, smiling politely, oblivious, and then left. She exhaled once, a small sound, and for a moment, leaned closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her. I wanted to close the distance, wanted to, something, whatever this was, whatever we were, I wanted it there. But instead I froze, fingers brushing hers lightly, a whisper of a touch, and she didn't move away, didn't pull closer either. Her gaze lifted to mine, soft and uncertain, and my heart beat so loudly I was sure she could hear it. We stayed like that for a long second, caught between words we couldn't speak and gestures we couldn't resist. Finally, she shifted, breaking the tension, stepping back as though reminding herself of the lines we weren't supposed to cross. "I should finish these," she said. I nodded, though my chest ached with the weight of everything we hadn't said. The space between us seemed too wide, too charged, too full of possibility to be walked away from. And I knew, quietly, that it wouldn't stay this way for long. I found her on the bench in the little park behind our building, the one with the cracked wooden slats and a view of the city rooftops. The sun had dipped low, and everything glowed in that soft, amber light that makes ordinary streets look like a film set. I sat down beside her, careful to leave a space, though every instinct told me to close it. She was watching a mother with a stroller walk past, her hands clasped loosely over her bag. "She reminds me of someone," she murmured. Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the wind. I nodded, unsure what to say. My heart had been hammering all afternoon, a strange rhythm I couldn't shake. The quiet between us stretched, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like an invitation, or a warning. "You always seem calm," I said finally. My words sounded awkward even to me, like I was feeling too much through too few syllables. "Even when—" "I don't know. Things are messy." She glanced at me, eyes narrowing slightly, and for a moment I thought she might laugh, or brush it off. Instead, she let herself exhale slowly, letting the tension hang there, exposed. "Calm?" she said, voice almost a whisper. "Maybe. Or maybe I just hide it better than most." Her words landed, and I felt my own walls start to crumble. I wanted to tell her something. Something true. But the sentence wouldn't form. So I did the next best thing. I leaned just a little closer, close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder, the faint scent of lavender and cedar curling into my chest. She stiffened slightly, not moving away, but not inviting it either. I watched her fingers, fiddling with the edge of her scarf, and I realized how much I wanted to hold them, even just for a moment. I think about you," I said finally, voice low, almost unsure it was allowed. My hands flexed against my knees. "A lot. More than I probably should." Her gaze lifted slowly, and I caught the flash of something raw, surprise, fear, maybe guilt. She didn't speak immediately. Just looked at me, and the pause felt heavy enough to break the ground beneath us. "I shouldn't," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I mean, you're young. And I—" Her voice trailed off, and she looked down at the slats of the bench, twisting her fingers together. I swallowed. The words I wanted to say lodged somewhere between my ribs and my throat. I wanted to tell her it was okay. That the age, the past, the caution, it didn't matter. That I didn't care about the rules she seemed to carry with her. Instead, I just sat there, letting the silence do the work. Letting her walls show cracks I didn't try to fix. Finally, she looked up, and her eyes were bright, shimmering with something she refused to name. "Do you really mean that?" she asked, voice trembling just enough to make my chest tighten. I didn't answer. I just let my fingers twitch against the wood of the bench, and in that pause, I knew the question wasn't just hers. Would I take the next step if she let me? The next week, she was different. Not colder, not distant in an obvious way, but cautious. The ease between us had shifted, like the air before a sudden storm. I tried stopping by the cafe, hoping to catch her for a quick hello, but she wasn't there. Not once. When I texted, just a casual, "Hey, want tea?" I saw the 3 little dots, the typing indicator, for a long time. Then, nothing. Hours passed. I stared at the screen until it glowed dimly, then set it down without knowing why. I imagined her sitting somewhere else, folding laundry, stirring tea, pretending she didn't think about me. My mind spun little scenarios. Maybe she had an ex she hadn't told me about. Maybe her daughter was visiting. Maybe she was reconsidering every interaction we'd shared. My chest felt tight, not heavy exactly, but taut, like a violin string. 2 days later, I ran into her in the hallway outside our building. She had her coat pulled tight around her, hair tucked behind her ears, eyes fixed on the floor. "Hey," I said softly, letting my voice linger in the air. "Hi," she replied, quick, clipped. Her glance flicked at me, but she didn't stop. She didn't invite conversation. I wanted to ask if I'd done something wrong. If she was upset or scared. But the words caught in my throat. So I just walked alongside her, careful not to crowd her space, careful not to speak. She paused at the door to her apartment, keys in hand. "Everything okay?" I asked finally, voice almost breaking. She hesitated, lips pressing together. Then, "Yeah. Just busy," she said. Her tone didn't lie, but it left room for everything else. Room for the things she didn't say. I watched her step inside, door clicking shut behind her. I didn't knock. I didn't text again that night. Instead, I sat on the stairs outside, letting the quiet of the empty hallway press against me. Later, I scrolled through old messages, rereading things she had said, small observations, a joke about spilled tea, the way she had remembered my favorite book. I felt a pang, but not heartbreak. Something different. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. The next day, I left my apartment door slightly ajar, half expecting to see her in the hall. But the seat across from mine at the cafe stayed empty. Her table for tea, untouched. The napkin folded just so. I imagined all the things I wanted to say, then deleted them. Imagined her face when she finally looked up and saw me, and then didn't reach for it. And I realized that maybe, just maybe, some silences were louder than words. So I waited. And in waiting, I noticed the rhythm of my own breathing, the click of shoes in the hall, the way the city carried on indifferent to every pause, every hesitation. Somewhere, she was living her life. Somewhere, I was living mine. And in between, a sentence hung unfinished. It was late afternoon when I found her leaning against the railing of the rooftop garden. The city sprawled below us, bathed in gold, but the world beyond didn't matter. Only her. I hesitated at the door, half wondering if I should leave, if I should pretend the empty days didn't hurt. But something in her posture, slight slump of the shoulders, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, pulled me forward. "Hey," I said softly. She looked up, eyes wary for a second, then softened. "You came," she murmured. I nodded, hands stuffed into my pockets, shifting from foot to foot. I wasn't sure I should. I'm glad you did." Her voice was quiet, and in it, I heard a vulnerability that had been absent in the past week. The careful wall was down, even if just a crack. We stood there, watching the city, either moving closer, either retreating. And then, almost imperceptibly, she brushed a stray leaf from the railing, fingers lingering on the wood longer than necessary. "I didn't mean to pull away," she said finally, words hesitant, careful. I wasn't sure what I was doing. Or feeling." I exhaled slowly, letting all the tension I'd been holding seep out. "I wasn't sure either," I admitted, voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. "But I kept thinking, if I didn't come, I'd regret it. Even if nothing happened." Her eyes met mine, soft, searching. And in that gaze I saw everything she hadn't said, the caution, the worry, the hope. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real. "I keep thinking about what could happen," she said, almost whispering. "And then I think about what I might lose." I stepped a fraction closer, enough for the warmth of her arm to brush mine. Not reaching, not demanding. Just there. "I know," I said. "I feel that too." Silence fell again, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was patient. Allowing. She tilted her head slightly, a small, nervous gesture, and I realized how long I'd been waiting for that. Waiting for a crack in the hesitation, for a sign that we could exist in the same space without the weight of all the unspoken. "I don't know what comes next," she said, voice small, honest. "Then we figure it out," I said simply, leaving the words unembellished. She let out a soft laugh, a little shaky, but it was a release. I could see it in her shoulders, in the way her fingers relaxed along the railing. She glanced at me, and in her eyes there was something I hadn't seen before, trust. We stayed like that for a while, quiet, side by side. She shifted just enough to brush her hand against mine, tentative, like testing if it belonged there. I didn't move it away. Didn't ask. Just let it be. "Okay," she said finally, almost to herself, almost to me. I smiled. Okay, I echoed. No grand declaration. No fireworks. Just that. A small, human connection. Enough to start. The morning light hit the cafe at 8:47 a.m., slanting through the blinds in thin, warm stripes. I was already there, black coffee in hand, the steam curling upward in a small dance. She arrived a few minutes later, carrying her chamomile tea, eyes lighting up in a way that didn't need words. We slid into the corner booth, the one with the scratch table near the window, and settled into a quiet rhythm that had become ours. No big confessions, no grand gestures. Just presence, the kind that felt like a hand reaching for another, and not letting go. I remembered the bench in the park where we had nearly crossed lines we weren't ready to name. She smiled faintly when I mentioned it, a small acknowledgement that made the memory feel like ours alone. We talked about the mundane things, the weather, the cat that had taken to sunbathing on her balcony, the slow expansion of the neighborhood coffee scene. But between sentences, in the pauses, there was everything we had been carrying, the uncertainty, the small fears, the quiet exhilaration of being noticed. You always get the timing right, she said, stirring her tea slowly, eyes flicking to mine with the tiniest smirk. I'm just early, I said, shrugging, though I knew she knew it was more than that. We laughed softly, a dry, shared humor that made the small cafe feel like a private world. My hands folded around my mug, warm, steady. She traced the rim of her cup with one finger, a subtle rhythm I had memorized without realizing it. Months had passed since that first coffee, since the almost kiss on the terrace, since the week of silence that had made everything feel suspended. Life hadn't changed completely. There were still deadlines, late nights at work, forgotten texts. But we had found a space in it, a shared pause, a place that belonged only to us. After tea, we walked out into the crisp morning, shoulders brushing lightly. She paused at the corner where the old oak tree leaned over the sidewalk, leaves drifting in the wind. I noticed her hands in her coat pockets, the tilt of her head, and realized I had been looking forward to this. Quiet moments like these, that weren't extraordinary but mattered more than anything else. When she finally spoke, her voice low and almost playful, she said, "You'll stay, won't you?" I nodded without hesitation. "Always," I said, though it wasn't a promise. Just a simple truth. We kept walking, side by side, letting the world carry on around us. No declarations. No dramatics. Just small, quiet steps forward together. And in that, it felt like enough. Later, I would remember the steam rising from her tea, the smell of coffee on my fingers, and the tilt of her smile. A memory only we would share, small and unremarkable to anyone else, but infinite to us. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?